recently I completed a test for .22 hunting pellets and the results were very interesting. I looked at the accuracy of 9 different pellets along with the penetration and deformation characteristics and the effect different powered guns had on them. Well, this time it's the turn of the 177 hunting pellets, so which should you consider and which should you leave on the shop shelf? Hello and welcome to AAR on Air. It's hunting pellet testing again, this time 177 calibre in both sub 12 foot-pounds and FAC higher power. Now I realise not many people use 177 in FAC form, which is quite possibly an oversight. In a lot of Europe and of course in the States, this is an off-the-shelf power level and accurate gun. So again, I've chosen 9 hunting pellets to see if they're any good, not only in terms of accuracy, but to find out how the energy is dispersed to gauge its stopping power. I will be using some ballistic gel to film the effects of the penetration, and if you didn't catch the last test, you may want to check it out here. And it also shows you how to make your own inexpensive and very effective ballistic gel. So, to start with, what are the 9 pellets we're going to be using and testing today? They are JSB Exact, H&N Barracuda Hunter Extreme, H&N Terminator, JSB Ultrashock, JSB Stratton, H&N Piledriver, Predator Polymag and the Predator Metal Mag, and the H&N Excite Hammer Budget, which aren't necessarily a hunting pellet, but a chance to see what cheap pellets do. And we'll be putting these through several guns, including the FX Wildcat, the Viroc HW110, and the FAC-rated BSAR-10 Mark II. Now, I like all of these guns, so much so that I bought them. These are mine. Firstly, the target work, out at 40 metres on a November day in the UK. First up, and being used as the yardstick to compare against, the stalwart JSB Exact, here in 8.44 grains. As expected, a pretty tight group using the FX Wildcat. You can see why I use these pellets a lot. H&N Hunter Extremes next. Again, showing a surprisingly tight group. I say surprisingly because in the .22 calibre the results were a little iffy. H&N Terminator then. Now these are quite lightweight at 7.25 grains and are likely to suit a sub 12 foot-pound gun more than an FAC. And sure enough, a nice tight little group. Number 4 on the list are the Ultrashocks from JSB. Now I called these Ultra Shocking in the .22 test and I'm hanging on to that name here too. Less than usable results, certainly to my mind. JSB Strattons, well, these are very similar to the Air Arms Hunter in shape and results, giving a reasonable result in this film section. Off film, they produced even better results and some really nice tight groups. Pretty good really. The H&N Piledriver, well, to be honest, at 21 grains I didn't expect anything amazing, certainly not in sub 12 foot-pounds, and no surprise, they were pretty much all over the place and they didn't do any better off camera either. Hopefully they'll do better in the FAC section later. Now on to the polymags. These don't suit all guns and you will have to watch the magazine because sometimes these are too long to fit some guns. The grouping from these was pretty much the same on and off camera and may suit some guns and barrels better than here with the FX or the Viroc. To do a direct comparison, here are the Predator Metal Mags, which are 8.5 grains rather than the 8 grains of the plastic tip version. And they did slightly worse in the grouping tests. Again, maybe a different gun would prefer them. Finally, this was an option to do a direct comparison with a real budget pellet. These are actually made by H&N, and in their defence, they don't claim they're anything but a budget pellet. So, putting them through a tough test in quality guns simply highlighted why you should never buy budget pellets for anything other than a bit of close pistol plinking or the like. Certainly not for any hunting. Point proven, really. That done, it's time to look at the penetration part of the test, and I'm going to be using the ballistic gel cooked up by Mrs. AAR. Now, for hunting, a bit of penetration is required, but not too much. It's more about deforming the pellet and causing shock once the pellet has gone in. First up then, the JSB Exact. 130mm or 5 inches depth of penetration, little or no shock, and maintained its shape fully. Hunter Extreme, 80mm of penetration or just over 3 inches, a neat hole and little or no deformation. The H&N Terminator travelled the shortest distance at 65mm or 2.5 inches and started to deform and spin itself around inside the gel. The Ultrashock travelled 90mm or 3.5 inches and barely started to deform, with little or no shock trail behind it. JSB Stratton, 4 inches or 100mm, maintaining its shape completely and leaving a neat hole behind itself. The Pile Driver didn't. Well, not really. Just 90mm or 3.5 inches, no shock, and you could reuse the pellet if you were so minded. On to the Predators. The Polymag left its plastic point early in the entry and achieved a final depth of 70mm or 2 3/4 inches, and started to twist itself around once inside, starting to cause internal damage and starting to deform the pellet too. The Metal Mag is a similar story, leaving its tip behind and travelling a greater distance of 80mm or 3 1/4 inches, but not deforming much at all. Then the Budget Pellet, 100mm or 4 inches in, neat hole and no real deformation. So from here, the takeaway is the Terminator had the greatest effect and would probably be the choice if it suited your combination. Or you could give the Polymags a try. Moving on to the FAC testing next, I realise it's not a high volume sales calibre for hunting, but I've used these a lot and the accuracy is excellent. 40-metre target work first then. JSB Exact. On the day of filming this, it wasn't as tight a group as I normally get from these, but it was all within the size of a beer bottle top. The Hunter Extreme were more than good enough and very rewarding to shoot, and did much better here than in the 22 caliber in the FAC guns. The Terminator again, not bad, but I would have liked to see tighter groups to see these used for any real hunting. But don't forget, these are very light for an FAC gun, in all fairness. The JSB Ultrashock, though, are 10.34 grain and weight-wise would suit an FAC gun more. But out on the range, they were, yet again, ultra-shocking. I would love to know if anyone has used these and achieved better results and just what combination they used to achieve it. Because I was really struggling with these pellets that appeared to be the same shape backwards or forwards. The Strattons then, 8.26 grains but all over the place and not on my favourite list by any means. Then the heavyweight pile drivers. Well, they certainly suit the FAC better than the sub-12 guns, and maybe with more practice they could be persuaded to group tight enough to use. The Polymags then, really good. They seem to suit the FAC powered rifle and grouped well enough to use in a hunting environment. Let's look at its sibling then, the Metal Mag. Again, more than usable with a pretty good group and consistent. Finally, the Budget Pellets again, and again, all over the place, confirming that these are not suitable for any serious target or hunting work. I must admit, it was quite fun trying to guess where they were going to go next. and it was quite a surprise to get one on the target. Target work done then. Now let's go back to the penetration test and see just how they all compared. Starting with the JSB Exact, again a clear entry and not a lot of shock behind it, reaching quite a depth of 190mm or 7.5 inches and maintaining its shape. The H&N Hunter Extreme achieved only the same distance as when it was used in the sub 12 foot-pound gun, 80mm or just over 3 inches, but left the biggest shock behind itself and deformed heavily. Then the Terminator, again excellent shock to the gel, only 110mm depth or 4.5 inches and high deforming characteristics. Excellent. The JSB Ultrashock finally shows why it was given its name. 50mm depth or just 2 inches and good shock, but high deformation. Quite a pleasant surprise. But the problem with this pellet still has to be that to get it to deform in the target, you first need to be able to hit the target, and the chances of doing this seem pretty remote to my mind. The Stratton, 130mm depth, not as much shock as I would like to have seen, and a little or no deforming once it was in. The pile driver, well, yes, in this case it does. 8 inches or 200mm, one very neat hole and fully retained its shape. In fact, you could almost reuse the thing. If it's depth you want, this is probably the one for you. The Predator's next, Polymag, 4 inches or 100mm, and as in the 2.2 test, it's turned itself around inside the gel with a fairly high level of deformation and left its plastic point elsewhere. Not a high level of shock though. The Metal Mag version, again about 4 inches or 100mm, in excellent deforming characteristics and left the metal top elsewhere. Remember, if you're going to use these for hunting for food, make sure you dig all the bits out before cooking and eating. Finally, the budget pellet, 130mm depth or 5 inches, a bit of a shock in its wake and slightly squashed itself up a little. The conclusion from the gel test is H&N take the laurels with the Hunter Extremes and the Terminator pellets for high deforming and shock levels, followed by the Predator Polymags and Metal Mags. When comparing the depths and deformation of the 177 pellets used in an 18 foot-pound rifle with the earlier 2.2 caliber test I did with the 40 foot-pound gun, they're almost identical. Which, considering this gun has less than half the power of the 2.2, it has to show you that a 177 gun does have its place in a hunting environment. I will point out that the only real difference is the higher level of shock behind the heavier 2.2 pellets. The final conclusion has to be, firstly, to recognise the ability of a 177 FAC for hunting, giving a slightly better accuracy result than a 2.2 caliber, but still able to penetrate and shock the internals of the quarry. Yes, I'll be the first to admit the higher damage a 2.2 can do, but this 177 test has been a pleasant surprise. The other takeaway has to be the fact that the deforming pellets seem to be tailored more to higher power rifles than the standard UK sub 12 foot-pound guns. If you could buy only one tin and wanted a balance between accuracy, damage and deformation, it would seem to be the H&N Terminator. But of course, it needs to suit your gun and barrel configuration. Otherwise, if you're only shooting sub 12 foot-pounds and not sure, simply stick to a high quality dome Diablo and rely more on the accuracy and placement of your shot. Hopefully I've shown you why you need to buy a quality pellet and not go out buying the cheapest you can and expect them to put pellet on pellet. It just isn't going to happen. And you run a risk, in fact a high risk, of injuring rather than cleanly dispatching. And that's not what hunting is about. I have again enjoyed this test and learned quite a bit. Hopefully you guys have found it informative too. Please shoot safely, have fun, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.